Imagine you're 28 years old. You did what everyone told you to do. You stayed in school, got a degree, found a decent job, started saving money, avoided unnecessary spending. Maybe you even skipped vacations and drove an old car longer than you wanted. Then, one day, you open Zillow. You find a house you like. Nothing crazy. 3 bedrooms, small yard, normal neighborhood. The price? $600,000. You stare at the screen. Maybe refresh the page. Maybe think it's a typo. It isn't. And suddenly, you realize something that millions of young Americans are realizing at the exact same moment. The American dream didn't disappear. It just got a lot more expensive. For most of the last century, buying a home was considered a normal milestone of adulthood. Today, for many Gen Z Americans, it feels like trying to buy a Ferrari. Something reserved for people with far more money than you. But here's what's strange. America is richer than ever. Technology is more advanced than ever. Productivity is higher than ever. So why does homeownership feel further away than it did for previous generations? Did Gen Z make bad choices? Are young people simply spending too much money? Or is there something much bigger happening behind the scenes? Because once you understand what's really driving this crisis, you'll realize this isn't just about houses. It's about how wealth is created, how money moves, and why an entire generation feels like it's running on a treadmill that's getting faster every year. Let's start with something that might surprise you. Your grandparents didn't become wealthy because they were financial geniuses. Most weren't. They became wealthy because they bought assets at the right time. And for millions of Americans, that asset was a house. Back in the 1970s and 1980s, the typical home cost roughly 3 to 4 times the average annual salary. Today, in many major cities, homes can cost 8, 10, or even 15 times annual income. Think about that for a second. Imagine if groceries became 3 times more expensive than salaries. People would panic. Yet that's essentially what happened in housing. The difference is that it happened slowly. So slowly that many people didn't notice until it was too late. And that gradual change is exactly what makes it so dangerous. Because people adapt to slow-moving problems. A little higher this year, a little higher next year. Then suddenly 20 years pass, and affordability has completely collapsed. But home prices didn't just magically rise. There were reasons, lots of them, and they all stacked on top of each other. First came low interest rates. After the 2008 financial crisis, central banks wanted to stimulate the economy, so they lowered borrowing costs for years, then even more during the pandemic. Money became incredibly cheap. And when borrowing becomes cheap, asset prices tend to explode. Stocks went up, crypto went up, and housing went up. A lot. People could suddenly qualify for larger mortgages, which meant they could bid higher, which pushed prices higher, which allowed the next buyer to bid even higher. And the cycle continued. At first, homeowners loved it. Their houses were worth more every year. But what felt like wealth creation for one group became a barrier for another. Because every dollar added to home values made it harder for future buyers to enter the market. And then something happened that made everything worse. The pandemic. During 2020 and 2021, the housing market entered absolute chaos. People wanted more space. Remote work became common. Families moved away from city centers. Demand exploded. At the same time, supply couldn't keep up. Builders faced labor shortages, material costs skyrocketed. Construction slowed. Suddenly, millions of people were competing for a limited number of homes. And whenever demand overwhelms supply, prices go vertical. In some areas, houses gained more value in 2 years than they had in the previous decade. People were offering tens of thousands of dollars above asking price. Some buyers waived inspections. Others bought houses without even seeing them. Think about how crazy that is. People were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on homes they had never physically visited. That's not normal behavior. That's what happens during a frenzy. But the biggest twist was still coming: inflation. When inflation surged, the Federal Reserve stepped in aggressively. Interest rates rose faster than they had in decades. Mortgage rates doubled, then doubled again. And suddenly, buyers faced a nightmare scenario. Home prices were still high, but monthly payments exploded. A house that seemed affordable at a 3% mortgage suddenly became impossible at 7%. Same house, same neighborhood, completely different payment. Imagine walking into a restaurant and finding out your favorite meal now costs twice as much. You'd probably stop ordering it. That's exactly what happened to housing. Millions of buyers simply got priced out. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Because individual buyers weren't the only people competing for homes. Large corporations entered the market too. Private equity firms, institutional investors, massive funds managing billions of dollars. To them, houses weren't homes. They were assets, revenue streams, investments, and unlike ordinary families, these firms often paid cash. No mortgage approval, no financing delays, no uncertainty. If a family offered $400,000, an investor might offer $420,000 in cash and close within days. Who do you think the seller chooses? This changed entire neighborhoods. Thousands of homes that once would have gone to families became rental properties, investment portfolios, corporate assets. And while these companies weren't responsible for the entire crisis, they certainly added fuel to the fire. Now let's talk about something people rarely discuss, the wealth gap. Because housing isn't really about housing, it's about wealth. For decades, homeownership acted like a giant wealth-building machine. You bought a house, made monthly payments, built equity, watched property values rise. Then, one day you sold it or passed it down to your children. Generation after generation repeated the process. This is how many middle-class families became wealthy. Not through stock picking, not through startups, not through crypto, through real estate. Now imagine being locked out of that system. That's where many Gen Z adults find themselves today. They're paying rent every month, often thousands of dollars. Yet none of that money builds ownership. None of it creates equity. None of it compounds into wealth. And over time, that difference becomes enormous. A homeowner sees rising prices and celebrates. A renter sees rising prices and panics. Same market, completely different experience. This is why housing has become one of the defining economic issues of our generation. It's not simply about shelter. It's about opportunity. It's about who gets access to wealth-building tools and who doesn't. And housing affects far more than finances. People delay marriage, delay having children, delay moving, delay career changes, delay starting businesses. Why? Because housing costs consume such a large share of income. When housing becomes expensive, everything else becomes harder. This creates a ripple effect across society. A housing crisis eventually becomes an economic crisis, a demographic crisis, because uncertainty changes how people live. But despite all this bad news, there is something important you need to understand. Gen Z is not doomed. That's the narrative you hear online. And it's wrong. The challenge is real. But real challenges require adaptation, not despair. First, stop comparing yourself to previous generations. This is probably the biggest mistake people make. Your parents played a different game. Your grandparents played an even different one. Comparing your housing journey to theirs is like comparing today's NBA players to athletes from the 1950s. The rules changed, the environment changed, everything changed. Second, focus heavily on increasing income. Most financial advice revolves around saving money. Saving matters, but income matters more. You can only cut expenses so far. You can't skip rent. You can't skip groceries forever. But increasing your earning power can dramatically change your financial trajectory. The people who eventually buy homes often don't do it because they became extreme savers. They do it because they increased their income significantly over time. Third, think differently about location. Many people are emotionally attached to expensive cities, and that's understandable. But sometimes, the smartest financial decision is moving to a market where opportunity and affordability still exist. America is huge. Housing markets are not the same everywhere. Some regions remain dramatically more affordable than others. Fourth, understand that homeownership is a tool, not a trophy. Social media often makes it seem like owning a house is the ultimate sign of success. It isn't. It's simply one financial tool among many. Sometimes renting while aggressively investing can be the smarter move. Sometimes buying is smarter. The answer depends on the numbers, not emotions. And finally, remember this: every generation believes its biggest challenge will last forever. History says otherwise. Markets change, policies change, technology changes, economies change. The future rarely unfolds the way people expect. The people who build wealth aren't usually the best predictors. They're the best adapters. They see reality clearly, accept it, and position themselves accordingly. Because the biggest danger facing Gen Z isn't expensive housing. It's believing expensive housing means wealth is impossible. Those are two completely different things. Home ownership may be harder than it was 30 years ago. That's true. But wealth creation still exists. Opportunity still exists. The game has changed, but the game isn't over. Not even close. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all. The winners of the next 20 years won't necessarily be the people who bought houses first. They'll be the people who understood how the system works and adjusted faster than everyone else. So here's the question. Do you think Gen Z is struggling because of personal financial decisions? Or do you think the economic system has fundamentally changed? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to see where you stand. And if you enjoy deep dives into money, business, psychology, and the hidden forces shaping your financial future, make sure to subscribe, because the biggest financial stories are usually the ones nobody notices until they're already changing their lives.